Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Maggie Grabmeyer. I'm an adult services librarian here at the Mill Valley Public Library. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's local author panel, Writing Across Borders, featuring Erin Van Rheenen, Inga Aksamit, and Joanna Kalbus, and moderated by Barbara Lane. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we are gathered on the occupied territory of the Coast Miwok people. I'd like to express gratitude for the Coast Miwok people and encourage you all how to find out how to get involved and learn more about the indigenous people in Marin County by checking out coastmiwokofmarin.org. After the program, the authors will be selling copies of their book, and they'll have time for a brief signing, so we hope you'll consider buying some books and supporting our local authors. And I wanted to ask by a show of hands, how many of you have ever lived in another country? Oh, very cool. We've got some experience. And how many of you are writers? Okay, so dispense some wisdom, guys. Tonight's presenters have all written about the experience of living in a different culture, and tonight we'll hear about their experiences of identity, belonging, and the craft of storytelling. And it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists. Inga Aksamit is an award-winning author, adventurer, and former oncology nurse. Raised in Pakistan, Peru, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and California, her third culture childhood inspired Between Worlds, an expat's quest for belonging. She also wrote Highs and Lows on the John Muir Trail and The Hungry Spork. Erin Van Rheenen has lived in Nigeria, Ireland, Mexico, Ecuador, Guatemala, and Costa Rica, where for several years she explored the country, researching Living Abroad in Costa Rica, a Move Abroad guide, and The Manatee's Big Day, a bilingual children's book. She's contributed to many travel guides, and her first novel, You Could Be Happy Here, came out in September. Joanna Kalbus was born in North Korea. She made two critical migrations, from North Korea to South Korea after the communist takeover, and then to the United States as a 10-year-old during the Korean War. She pursued her education in the United States, obtaining a PhD in educational administration, and has been involved in education for 35 years. The Boat Not Taken is her first book. And tonight's moderator, Barbara Lane, is a book columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, book reviewer for NPR and several national newspapers, an author-interviewer for City Arts and Lectures, the Commonwealth Club, and a number of literary festivals. Please join me in welcoming local authors Joanna Kalbus, Erin Van Rheenen, and Inga Aksamit, and tonight's moderator, Barbara Lane.
Thank you, Maggie, and thanks to all of you for coming tonight. We're in my favorite place, which is the library. And I always say the libraries are the last true democracies because anybody can come in and get a book. So it makes me very happy to be in this splendid library. So we have a panel of incredibly accomplished women with incredibly diverse backgrounds. So I'm not going to have to do very much now, but what we're going to do is start with each author telling us a little bit about their books and then a short reading so you get a flavor. So since you're on the end, Inga, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Inga, and I wrote a book about my experience growing up in an expat family.
Can you all hear?
Living over...
Is it on?
Yeah, she's adjusting it back there. How's that? Is that okay? Okay. Yeah, growing up in an expat family, and so we lived in a lot of places that people wouldn't expect, because I find that a lot of people assume that that's in Europe, and we didn't live anywhere in Europe. And so there were a lot of challenges that I think people don't necessarily think about, so that's what I uncover in my book.
And are you going to read a short section?
Right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. All right. Birth of a country, Bangladesh. Thunder boomed in the distance. Inga, wake up, my father said one night, shaking me gently. Hurry, I think the war has started. Get dressed. That thunder was cannon fire. I sat up quickly and reached for my clothes, straining to hear Dad's quiet words to Mom behind their closed door. What was I dressing for? Were we going to the airport? A friend's house? Running away on foot? Where were my shoes? I couldn't think straight. Matching the rapid pops of gunfire in the distance, my heart banged in my chest. Mom came into my room just as I found my shoes. It was a mistake. Your dad looked at the calendar, and it's March 23rd, Pakistan Day, and that was a 21-gun salute for Independence Day. Go back to bed. Relieved, I flung myself down next to Chuz, my doll, and tried to go to sleep in my daytime clothes, but every nerve vibrated with fear. My heart continued thumping, and my thoughts were scrambled like mushy eggs. The signs of increasing military readiness had been obvious for weeks, but we had never talked about a plan. Uniformed men holding rifles or clubs stood on street corners as convoys of tanks moved around the city. I didn't even recognize the grassy area in the park where the boys and I used to play. Now it was dotted with canvas tents and army trucks in a makeshift military camp. 2 nights later, on March 25th, 1971, my mother jolted me awake with, "Take your pillow and get in the dressing room now." I hadn't relaxed since the false alarm, so I woke instantly. "This time it's real. This means the war is starting," said Dad. I followed the new plan, however flimsy it felt in the moment. No need to dress for unknown journeys, just a short dash into the dressing room, deemed the safest place in the house. I wished I could escape the fear, but the thick walls couldn't block the random pops filling the air, so different from the evenly spaced 21-gun salute of a couple of days before. Surely someone would do something to stop this by morning. But who? The police? The army? The US government? I realized how little I knew about how the world worked, despite having lived in so many different countries.
Wow. Don't you want to hear more? Well, you'll have to buy the book. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Joanna?
Hi, I'm Joanna Kalbus. Joanna was my baptismal name, anointed by French priest in North Korea.
Joanna, microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry, you can't hear. I used to be a principal. I thought I bullhorn. Okay, so here we go. And then Choi is my maiden name, and Kalbus is my husband's name. So, best way to synthesize my book is someone asked me, "How did you get the idea for The Boat Not Taken?" I started out with an ambitious agenda. I wanted to write an epic covering the entire 20th century, starting my mother as the lead character. The project came to mind as I stood looking at her newly installed marker designating her final resting place. Helen Sung-Koo Lee, born 1905, died 1996. Historically, the year she was born was the year when the Protective Treaty of 1905 was signed, which paved the way of Japan's colonization of Korea, annexation, like Putin is doing to Ukraine. I'm sorry. She lived during the harsh and often cruel Japanese rule of Korea, then World War II, which brought independence to Korea, but then division of the country into two. She survived the Korean War and led an immigrant life on the other side of the vast Pacific Ocean in America. In sum, her life story depicts the legacy for a divided land. I don't know if it was Inga or another writer, but I like to borrow their quotes. "Grief doesn't come as a wave, it comes as a question." So I'm 84 years old, and this is my debut book, and I am an accidental writer. I just miss my mother so much in that she breastfed me until I rebelled. I was 4 years old and eating kimchi. And I told her, I don't like your milk anymore. And then I slept with her. She was a widow. So I slept with her until the day before I got married. And then she lived with me and my family until she died. So it's a very close relationship. So that's why I wrote the book. Okay, and then, yeah, I know, she's rushing me.
No, no, she likes to give me a
because I admired her so much. I do a newspaper because I'm old. I don't like to read on online, you know. So I paid lots of money for San Francisco Chronicle, but it was because I wanted to keep all the columns that Barbara wrote. So I'll
But
do.
you know what? They, what was the word they used? They discontinued me.
I know.
They savaged the book section, and I didn't get enough, what did they say, eyeballs or whatever online. But you know what? That's okay. That's okay.
It wasn't okay for me.
Joanna,
Yeah.
let's continue.
But Barbara now has a Substack, The Book Lane.
I do have a Substack. It's called The Book Lane. If none of you, I don't know if you know what Substack is, but if you just Google Substack The Book Lane, you'll see it. But come on, read from your book already.
Already. Well, I want to say, those of you writers, I still have yellow copies that I clipped on from her column. So let me know. Again. All right. So I read that synopsis because we only know other countries when we invade them. So I wanted to make sure that you know where I am. So when I was 5 years old, we escaped to South Korea because the communists were coming in. And then when we got there, my mother didn't have a job or anything. But you know how it is, especially in Asian countries, males are valued. So my brother went to a distant relative, but she put me in an orphanage. And I don't know how long I stayed there because I was 5 years old, but one day she came for me. So finally, my mother did come back for me. "Are we going home, oh my?" I asked, with my face buried in her blouse. "Yes, we are going home," she said, as she picked up and held me. She meant we were going back to North Korea. We went to the boat dock. My mother found a boat scheduled to leave that day. We queued up. All the others in line were men. When my mother's turn came, she tried to book a passage back to North Korea. I became frightened when the man in charge started shouting at my mother. "Woman, are you out of your mind? Most people in North Korea are desperately trying to flee from there, and here you are trying to go back." He slapped my mother across her face and yelled, "Get out of here! Don't you ever try this again." My mother's left hand flew to her face, protecting herself from the sting of his slap. The ticket agent spat and shouted, "Next." I was terrified. I dared not cry. It would only have made matters worse for my mother. I held onto the folds of her skirt. When she stooped to pick up our blanket-wrapped bundle, I too leaned forward, still gripping her skirt. What that ticket agent did seemed cruel to a 5-year-old child. 50 years later, looking back, what I see is a human being showing his capacity to care for other human beings. By barring us from boarding that boat to North Korea, he saved our lives, lives that would have been torn apart had it not been for that boat not taken. So I titled my book, The Boat Not Taken, both to homage, or is it homage, to Robert Frost, but because that was a turning point in our lives. And what I thought about our journey and the turning point is that synchronicity is so important. You know, those times when it's improbable, but somehow it happened. If we didn't meet that ticket master, I wouldn't be here with you. And Barbara told me that I gotta shut up now, so.
No,
I'm done.
I didn't say a word. Thank you. A really dramatic story. A really dramatic story. And next author, Erin Van Rheenen, wrote a work of fiction, but as she'll tell you, many of the same themes are in her book. So take it away.
Well, thank you all for coming out, and thank you, Barbara and Inga and Joanna. I loved hearing your reading from your books. That was really powerful. I'm the only novelist here, but my book is about a woman in California who is mourning the death of her mother and who goes in search of her biological father in Costa Rica. The family had been spending the summers there when she was young, and so she heads back to this tiny little town on the coast. She is not as welcomed as she imagined she might be. She hasn't been there for a long time, and no one seems to remember her. But she keeps looking for her father. The book is about her trying to figure out who she is, who her parents are, and where she belongs. And I think we have some commonality in themes, and we all three of us have some intense mother-daughter stuff, which a friend who's here was saying that she was in a group of writers and they all had intense mother-daughter stuff. So maybe it's not that uncommon. But I do remember when I was growing up, all the sort of important American authors were men, and one of their themes was father-daughter. I mean, not father-daughter, father-son. So I'm glad to see that mother-daughter themes are coming to the forefront. Anyway, so the other thing about this book is, so let me take a step back. As many of you know, the United States has a problematic relationship with many countries in Latin America, and they often intervene where they're not wanted. And the question there is, what should our relationship be to Latin American countries, and do we belong there? And my protagonist, Lucy, is the individual embodiment of that question. She is an American woman. She's a middle-class white woman. She thinks she has a Costa Rican father. She doesn't know. And one of the questions that she asks herself and people in Costa Rica ask is, does she belong there? So, and I will read a very brief excerpt, if I can hold, yeah. You all did it so well, I can't believe it. So Lucy has traveled from Northern California to Costa Rica, and now she's on a bus to that tiny little town on the coast of on the Pacific coast of Costa Rica. Lucy's seatmate was giving her the once-over, taking in the travel-rumpled clothes and the hair plastered to her forehead. Lucy didn't return the woman's gaze or try to make herself more presentable. She was too busy peering past the woman and out the bus window, trying to see if anything looked familiar. When the road broke from the trees, there was the indelible blue of the Pacific. Coconut palms, South Sea natives that had arrived in the ballast water of ships, vaulted out over the sand. Somewhere, Lucy had seen a dismissive description of boilerplate tropical beauty, but this view hit her like a thump to the chest. A good term for the landscape might be ravishing, with all the violence the word implied. The natural world was full of ferocity, and the tropics sped up the life cycle. A plant grew faster here and died more quickly, its prime a brief moment between new growth and decay. The woman next to Lucy fidgeted, trying to get more comfortable on the narrow bench seat. She smelled bittersweet, like orange peel. ¿Dónde están tus hijos? She asked Lucy. Where are your kids? Lucy translated in her head, but didn't answer. She was remembering how her mother had become more maternal when her sister Faith had a child of her own, as if grandmotherhood had made that instinct finally kick in. Having children was one more thing that bonded them and excluded Lucy. Once, Lucy had chided Faith for being besotted by the replica of herself that she had produced. You think big chunks of yourself will be preserved in Travis after you're gone, but sooner than you think, your precious genes will be absorbed back into the common pool. Faith had waved the idea away. You don't get it. Maybe her sister was right, in this at least. Lucy felt more kinship with trees and animals than with humankind, and had a special fondness for insects, survivors who'd been around for 400 million years. Modern humans were the newcomers, arriving just 100,000 years ago. Bugs outnumbered humans by a magnitude that was almost impossible to conceive. Lucy had recently told her students that 1 square mile of Costa Rican rainforest had as many insects as there were people on the planet. Lucy's seatmate jostled her companionably. The woman was probably in her early 40s, older than Lucy, but not by much. She wore a tight skirt that ended well above her brown, dimpled knees, and a T-shirt with a big sequined heart. Mis hijos? My kids? My kids? Lucy patted her suitcase. Aquí, adentro. They're in here. Her seatmate's eyes widened at the thought of transporting kids in a suitcase. She started laughing so hard that the heart on the front of her shirt looked as if it were beating.
So, as you can see, each of the women here tonight have very different personal experiences, but of course there are commonalities. And what strikes me so much, or what interests me, is talking a little bit about the concept of home, since each of you left, or your character certainly left, what was home. So let's start with you, Joanna. Joanna, I got mixed up. Talk about what that means to you, the concept of home, and how that's reflected in your book.
Certainly is, home is not, oh, shoot. Okay. Certainly, home is not a place. I know that because when we came to United States, we stayed in the carriage house, carriage shelter, you know, the old time where the carriage gets into the shed, and I don't consider that home. Is place where we sleep and so on. So I think home has to be equated to where do you belong? And belonging is relationships, is heartwarming, and not being left out, being an outsider. So home is where the heart is, and it is very difficult when you leave your motherland and adopt another country. Language is different, and one time my mother worked in a where the Spanish rice goes down in a conveyor belt, and the guy who is the coach, or what is it, would cuss, and so she learned how to say a cuss word, but you would never understand it because she'll say "Saramata Bechu." And even I, when I was a teacher, these are examples of what I think home should be. Is that I was a teacher, and on the refrigerator door of our lunch room, it says, "Bring your buns." And I said, "No, I'm bringing liquid, water and 7-Up and so on. I'm not bringing buns." But I forgot buns mean butt. So even small little things like that, you have to get you got to discover and learn what the new country, culture, language, and so on. So I should end because I know the clock is thinking. So it is that it's the belonging that makes a place a home.
Erin, you were nodding your head in agreement. So talk about home from your perspective, and I guess your character's perspective.
Well, like Inga, our family lived a lot of places. We lived, when I was 4 and 5, we lived in Nigeria. My dad was a Peace Corps doctor. When I was 10, we were in Guatemala for a while. When I was 16, I spent a year abroad in Ireland. I lived 2 years in Ecuador. I lived in Oaxaca, where I met my first husband. I can say that because my second husband isn't here tonight. I gave him the night off. He's been very supportive. But we moved around a lot, and I moved to Costa Rica as an adult, and I stayed there for several years, and I traveled by myself, and I interviewed probably hundreds of people for my book, Living Abroad in Costa Rica. And, you know, when I was there, I was wondering, is this someplace I could be for the long term? And do people want me here? So what I was feeling as an individual in Costa Rica, my character, Lucy, is also, her circumstances are different, but she is wrestling with the same question. Does she belong here? What does it mean to belong? But when Joanna was talking, I was thinking of the difference. You know, I used to say, like, you know, I've lived in many different places. I used to say, I'm at home in the world. I feel like the world is my home. And I have come to realize what a privileged position that is and how political it is to say that, yeah, I can go here, I can go there, and that's just cool. Whereas a lot of people can't. And travel and living abroad is inherently political. It's like, who gets to cross borders? Who is welcome when they get there? Who is not welcome? So I think my idea of being at home in the world or at home abroad has changed a lot. And I wonder even more than I used to, what is our place? Our as in the United States people. What is our place, and what are our responsibilities as we travel and as we think of living in a different country?
Provocative, and yeah. Okay, Inga.
Yeah, home is a slippery concept for me, and many of you probably know or can remember that our first memories are formed around 3.5 or 4 years old. And I was 4 years old when we moved from California to Pakistan. And so we moved to Lahore. And so my earliest memories are mostly from there. I have some hazy memories of Vacaville, but they mostly are reinforced by a few photographs that we have, so I'm not really even sure that they're my memories. And so after 2 years, we got home leave, and so my parents talked about going home, but that was very confusing for me, because for me, home was Pakistan. I started school there, my earliest friends were there, and so it's interesting to think about my parents, or any parents of people who move around a lot. Some families have 3 kids, and all the kids were born in different countries. And so everybody has a different sense of identity, and their idea of home could be very different. And so when people ask me where I'm from, even now, I kind of get seized up. And so in communities of people who grew up like I did, that question of where are you from is just one that we dread, that we talk about endlessly. How do you answer that? We have 3 sets of answers. There's the 30-second, the 3-minute, and the 30-minute plus, depending on how interested you are or how much I actually want to engage in that conversation at the moment. And so, when we talk about belonging also, I often felt very comfortable in the overseas environments because I went to international schools mostly, not always. I went to Spanish-speaking school in Peru, and I was taught by correspondence course with 5 kids from another family and me, that was it. But we were all living the same life basically, and so our questions would be, where'd you live last time, how long you here, meaning how long is your father's contract, it was always the father's at that time, and where are you going next? And so it was all very fluid, so I felt very comfortable in that environment. But coming back to the States, some people hear that I lived in California in between each of our overseas assignments, and they assume that, oh, well, at least you got to come home. Well, to me, those were the most difficult. I never came back to the same city or the same neighborhood. So in San Francisco, we might be in the Sunset District one time, in Richmond District the next, so I was going to different schools. I never went to the same school or picked up friendships. And when that scene that I read to you from Bangladesh, we did get evacuated in that war. We had a military evacuation, and I ended up in Marin. So I went to Sir Francis Drake High School, a pretty different environment where nobody really even knew the war was going on. And so I kind of faked it, and I talk about in the book, by the end of 4 years at Drake, I was, which is now, of course, Archie Williams, I felt like I was pulling it off. Like I joined sports teams, I had friends, and I was faking it pretty well as a US American teenager because I look the part, right? Nobody would, if you came up to me, I don't have an accent, I don't look different, I look like every other kid in Marin, and I'm a hidden immigrant. And so I just learned to read the cues and pick up on what the norms are for that time. When I was younger, the important thing was to learn playground games. So I came after Pakistan, we were in Hanford near Fresno, and tetherball was the big thing. So my mom would go down with me on the weekend and show me how to play tether. She had learned too. Then I went to Presidio Junior High, and so I saw a tetherball pole, and I was like, oh, good, I know how to play that. Well, I learned in that school, it was for the younger kids, and I had to learn all these complicated hopscotch games that I had no idea. So it's always a process, and even now, sometimes, as I was reading the book, I realized that I still feel that way a little bit, like I'm playing a role, and I'm pulling it off mostly, but not always.
I'm going to ask each of you versions of the same question, and then I bet Maggie's going to make us stop because we have to have time for Q&A. But starting with you, Joanna, there are so many misconceptions that particularly Americans have about other countries. And from your, no, I don't mean Joanna, I mean Inga first. Yeah, no, you'll get the gist. So Inga, what do you think are the most frequent things that Americans get wrong about Asia? Like when Americans go to Asia, what don't they understand? What are the most prevalent misunderstandings about the culture?
Well, for one thing, Asia's a really big place.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree? And if you think about reversing the question and asking somebody about the United States, and so a Californian's going to be really different from a Floridian or a person from Texas or Alaska. So the first thing is, Asia's huge. So I lived in South Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh. We lived in Indonesia. Japan is very different from a lot of those places. Korea's different. And so there are nuances. And so, that's the hard thing is I feel like I'm a citizen of the world. I can be anywhere. And yet I am not Asian. And so it feels a little awkward for me to even speak on that because I have probably my own biases that I'm not even aware of. And we have stereotypes. And so it's a really hard question. So I will try to tackle a part of it. And so I think people who aren't familiar with the Asian cultures that come from the States, and when I observe other tourists trying to solve a problem, and I see this kind of attitude coming out and this aggression, that I just understand that this is just going to go sideways immediately, because they don't understand that you need to approach, establish a relationship. And instead of walking up and saying, we need to solve this problem, hi, how are you? My name is such and such. I'm enjoying your hospitality very much. And kind of edge around to whatever the issue might be. And then try to work together so that everybody can save face.
Yeah.
And so there's some, basic things like that that I think are very widely spread through South Asia, Southeast Asia. And so I don't know.
No, I remember when I was in France and I learned when you went into a store and needed something, if you didn't say bonjour, madame, and just charged right in, and then you had to make it something you could solve together, not just, I need yada, yada, yada. So I hear that. Joanna, the question to you is, you came to the United States, again, when you were 10. So what did you think about this country as a 10-year-old that turned out not to be true at all? What misconceptions, maybe, did you have about the U.S. when you came?
That's a hard question. Yes.
Sorry.
I came when I was 10, and it was the Truman Eisenhower era. It's much different from now, and I'll say. And so I think there's a difference between being expat and being an immigrant. Yeah, and Inga was talking about your perceptions and all that, but what I saw the Americans in foreign country is we think that it's okay to say, do you speak English? Would it be proper if I came to you and say, do you speak Korean? Not a chance. Yeah, yeah, and so so that question about, is it about my perception of?
You can take it however you want, whatever.
Yeah. So going back to that era, I am in another country. I am a foreigner, and so as such, I need to adapt. It is not my my thing to rule and or say that I'm not going to do this. You obey whatever. You are the guest. I always felt like a guest, but not. Yeah. Even now, at that time, all I wanted to do is to look like you. To be an American girl, and it's very hard. As one of the Australian lady on a tour to Scotland, we were all sitting in a dining table and we're conversing, and there was a Japanese lady, and I asked her, "What do you do?" And she says, "I deliver babies." And I said, "Oh, how cute, the Japanese woman saying babies instead of baby." Yeah, so I laughed. So the Australian nurse said to me, "Don't think that you are an American. With your face, you'll never be an American." Yeah, that is, but that's reality. Yeah. Inga, you could go to you could be fine in every country because you got blue eyes and so on. But
sadly, that's true, because at the time that I was growing up overseas, Americans had a really positive image, And there's also the
A little
colonial,
different now, huh?
it's also the colonial overlay, and so the people.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, because I know what our time is, I'm going to have to toss this to Erin, and you're going to have to cover all of Latin America in terms of what are our misconceptions and what tackle it.
Well, first I want to just respond to a couple things that my panelists said. On the question of expat versus immigrant, I find that really interesting. And most of the North Americans and Europeans that I met living in Costa Rica did not call themselves immigrants. They called themselves expats.
Right.
And then I also know somebody who moved to Germany, and he told me that a lot of the North Americans in Germany call themselves immigrants. So it's just, and I think, I was thinking of when I went to live in Ecuador. I just graduated from college, and it was an open-ended trip, and it was the Reagan era. I wanted to get out of the US. I wanted to see how other people lived. And I realized I didn't have a lot of money, but in the 80s, you could have a job and pay not so much rent and save your money for traveling, and then you wouldn't have to work when you were there. If somebody from Ecuador had wanted to come to the United States at that same time, it would have been completely different. They can't earn as much money. They have a much harder time getting a visa. And they would come and have to maybe get a job that doesn't have anything to do with their experience. Like I know a man who came from Sudan. He was a doctor. He ended up working as a janitor at Harvard. Or, there's all sorts of that. So it's sort of like when someone comes from a country, a wealthier, more powerful country, to a poorer and less powerful country, it's very different. And as somebody like that, I feel like I have to be extremely careful and listen a lot, and not be a colonial presence, not be the kind of people that demand things. And a lot of the people I met there did. But what was your question?
I was just asking, I'm looking at Maggie, because we used to work together at the JCC. We know each other, and I can tell what's going on with her, but I'm just going to charge ahead. What are the misconceptions Americans have about Latin America?
Well,
Or
it's like
Costa Rica?
it's like what kind of Americans? Because obviously a lot of Americans have the misconception that we are free to invade a sovereign country like Venezuela and kidnap its head of state. I mean, I don't think, anyway, so that's a misconception.
I have a feeling no one in this room believes that. We are in Marin, so just say it. Go ahead.
But other than that, it's not, when Inga and Joanna were talking about Asian culture, although that's a huge thing, I think a Latin American culture also values relationships over productivity. And, a lot of North Americans who go down there are very frustrated because they can't get things done like they do in the United States. Things take longer, and they get very upset about that. And I think they do much better approaching it like both of you were describing, or Inga was describing, where you create a relationship and you are polite and you are a guest. So I think that's one thing we get wrong.
Yes, Joanna. Yes.
I have a misconception.
Okay.
When we came, we really thought the pavements in America were paved with gold. Yes, that's how America was to those of us who immigrated to here, and the American dream.
So I have a million other questions, mother-daughter relationships. I knew this would happen. But you know what? You're going to want to read all these books because not only are the topics fascinating, but I have to say it warms my heart that we aren't sitting up here with a bunch of 20-year-olds, because I'm so tired of reading books by 20-year-olds. These women have life experience that they've lived, and it makes me really happy to be part of this
Well,
evening.
thank you for telling me 20-year-olds. Ah.
All right, we've got some time to take questions from the audience, so, all right here.
Two questions. Erin, was your novel autobiographical? So that's question one. And then Joanna, I was curious why your mother would want to go back to North Korea. I guess she had family there maybe, but she wasn't aware how tough the life would be. I mean, and it was also interesting that she could decide when he said, don't go, okay, total change of plan so quickly. So maybe you could say a little bit about
Well,
that too.
can I answer first because my memory is short. Yeah, I'll forget. Okay. You don't mind? No. Young one. Okay. Yeah. Think about this. This is a woman of gentility, and she escaped and brought her two kids, 1, 5, and let's see, no, I was 5, and my brother was 13 years old. And then I told you that someone adopted him or could stay with the relatives, but I was in. So what is she going to do when her son is in another place, and the little daughter, 5-year-old daughter, is in the orphanage? What kind of life would she be leading? So she decided that it's better to go back where she has family. And that's, what is that in Spanish? Las familia es todos, right? Yeah. So that is the concept that she might not speak English very well, but she had agency, and she said that we're going back because we are going to stay with our family, and that's what it is. And as to the ticket master, I think he can see that my mother, I inherited her genes. I'm a tough woman, and she is tougher than me. And so he had to do what he had to do in order to persuade her that she shouldn't go back. And so that's, did I answer your 3 questions? Thank you.
So, as to whether my novel is autobiographical, many people have asked me that, and sometimes they phrase it in funny ways like, did you just tell your own story but slap the word novel on it to cover your ass? And I would say absolutely not. It is not my story. I have my protagonist wrestle with many of the things that I have wrestled with. She has a family situation that is not exactly like mine, but is parallel, like tell the truth, but tell it slant. And I was dealing with a lot of issues with my family. My parents are divorced. There's step siblings and half siblings, and fights over wills. And so I was working out a lot of that family stuff in her character. But it's not my story.
You did a good job.
Thank you.
I want to thank the library and thank all of you for sharing what you did. And I want to encourage, my name's Meredith. I'm a former teacher and a writer, and a former Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa. I want to encourage everybody who's here to read books that cross cultures, to write books that cross cultures. We have to spread spread knowledge about other places, other people. It's part of peacemaking. I wrote a book. I started teaching 50 years ago this year in Togo, West Africa. And I wrote a book about my adventures. It's called Tales of Togo, A Young Woman's Search for Home in West Africa. So this really ties everything together for me. Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions?
I wasn't expecting to have to ask them.
We'll let Barbara ask one more.
So, yeah, we covered a lot of this. You all have read each other's books, which is a wonderful thing. So do you have any questions for your fellow panelists or comments about their work?
Their books are great. They really are. I mean, they are page turners. And I love to read novels, and I'm just starting to read memoir. But I really enjoyed both of your books, and I would say that yours has so much emotion. And I really enjoyed not just learning about your past, which is fascinating, and what it's like to come to an entirely new country when you're just 10 years old, but just I liked how deep you went emotionally. I really appreciated that. And Inga, I loved reading about everywhere you went, Pakistan and Peru, and it's interesting because your living abroad experience was so different from mine because except for we had the Peace Corps thing when I was 4 and 5, but everything else was independent. And when I traveled by myself, completely independent. And so I had no backup, no base. But I liked hearing about what it was like to have a U.S. community and to be a part of that, and how interesting that was.
And I just when I read your 2 books, and it's so interesting that Erin had a novel, and I've been reading a lot of memoirs, especially since I've been writing mine for a couple of years, and just how much overlap there was. We mentioned before about that sense of belonging in your character, Erin's, and of course with you moving to another country and knowing that you weren't going home to live, or most likely. And I think about my great-grandparents who came over from Czechoslovakia, and they were immigrants, but we called ourselves expats, and in our framework, expat meant we knew we were there temporarily. So we were never had that expectation of needing to assimilate fully. We appreciated the culture, but we could take it in metered doses because we did have that support, and so that is a distinction. But we all still came out with those questions of identity and belonging and where's our place in the world. So I think it's interesting for kids to not have that framework that adults have. So when adults think about, oh, I'd love to live overseas, like if you hadn't had your childhood experience and you decided in your 20s that you want to go live in Europe or South America or Asia, you're fully formed. And so if you're a kid and you're having to constantly take on new roles and do that role playing in order to fit in, how do you develop your own sense of values and figure out who you are and what you stand for? Because everywhere I went, I couldn't hang on to anything in a very rigid way. And so most kids, I think, figure it out eventually in our 30s usually, with a little bit of therapy. And but what happens if you fall in with the wrong crowd? Like, what if the crowd is involved in a criminal activity, and that's what you have to do to fit in? There's just all these different ways you can go. So anyway, I found that that thread through all of our books was really interesting, even though we all had such different experiences.
Yeah, I concur with your 2 analyses. And Why are you laughing at me? I knew that I was reading their books because of the panel and all that, and it was really, the themes are generic, yeah, human, yeah, yeah, and there were parallels between Lucy and Joanna in some context, right? Yeah, and so I inserted myself in your book, and that really came alive, and I really enjoyed and appreciated your storytelling, and then Inga, I was so envious of you. I wanted to be you and swim in that Ritz-Carlton swimming pool. I don't even know how to swim, but wouldn't that have been nice? So it's a matter of perspective, I tell you, a point of view. Yeah, yeah. So I envied you.
Okay, we've got time for one more question from the audience. I think I saw one in the back. All right, you've got the last question.
So my question is, what was the hardest thing about writing your books? I aspire to write, and I'm just curious.
Hardest thing about writing my book is whether I wanted to publish it or not.
What do you mean?
I'll tell you. I wrote it for me. And when you write for yourself, you can do all the secret things, the vulnerabilities, and maybe that's because I wrote it for myself, that I didn't have any guardrail, guardrail. So it came, I call it soul writing, because I tell you, when I got to this country, English language is so hard. There were some Italian kids, and they spoke English very well because it's Latin rooted or Greek rooted, but Korean, my goodness gracious. So, third grade, we have to write a poem. So I wrote a poem. Cat ate a rat. C minus. So I never aspired to be a writer, and so, but I had to write this story because I miss my mother, and that was my connection to my mother. And so it took me 29 years to publish it because I couldn't out my mother. Yeah, so that was the hardest part. So personal, and I feel naked in front of you.
I think I felt a little bit the same way. I wrote my book after both my parents had passed away, and so part of it was I missed them. I'm an only child, and so I grew up in this very unusual environment. And then it just didn't occur to me until my father died. He died second. That there was no one left to remember with me. Yeah. And so I had taken for granted that we had this shorthand that we could just remember something. And so then to be writing the book without them to help me remember some of the things when I was very young. And also that whole vulnerability thing, I share some sensitive things and how deep to go with that and how much to share. And you get to make choices. You don't have to share everything. But I think, being of a certain age, I didn't have much to lose, so I ended up, feeling comfortable with that. But I think when you're 20, you feel a little bit more vulnerable about divulging some of that. Erin.
I so appreciate memoir writers. I think they are so brave. And I couldn't write a memoir, at least at this point. And so, like I was saying, the tell the truth, but tell it slant. I told a certain truth, but I fictionalized it because I would be terrified of being, of revealing not just myself, but my family. They're still very much around. And so I had to create a situation in my novel that was close enough to some of the things I'd been thinking about, but try to disguise it. So I love fiction for that reason, because you can hide.
All right, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you again to our panelists.
Thanks so much for coming.
Please remember to buy some books and get them signed, and have a great night. Thanks again.